Warm greetings from the Heights, and it is Everyday Shenanigans. In this commentary, this will be a two-part video pertaining to two children who were abandoned at a truck stop. They were unattended, and they were found wandering around in very horrible conditions. And the second video will be pertaining to, said commentary rather, will be pertaining to three individuals who have been brought up on charges of severe elderly abuse against their grandmother in Memphis, Tennessee. Thanks for joining me. The said commentary is by WKRG News 5. Toddlers naked, covered in feces, found at Loxley truck stop. As the sun beat down Wednesday morning at Love's truck stop, a customer noticed two toddlers, a boy and a girl, walking around the very busy parking lot. There's RVs, trailers, there's construction equipment, boats going through that front parking lot constantly, says Doug Phillips with Loxley Police. They would never have seen a child that small run up underneath one of them. The children were naked, alone, and Phillips says there was something else. The children were covered quite intensely with feces. He says it was in their hair, on their face, and had been there for days. Inside a van parked in the front parking lot of the truck stop, a Romanian couple identified as their parents, 20-year-old Alex Busuit and 19-year-old Larissa Suka, were found asleep while these kids were walking loose in the parking lot, says Phillips. Battling through a language barrier, police believe the couple was returning to Tennessee from a beach vacation. They are now facing felony charges of torture and willful abuse of a child. Luckily, somebody saw them and was able to call us, so we were able to get the kids the help they needed, says Phillips. It goes without saying it's a sickening incident to see a child in that condition. Investigators believe the van had been parked at Love's for at least a couple of hours. They are unsure how the children were able to get out of the van. So we have a case of a 20-year-old male and a 19-year-old woman who are believed to be the parents, Romanian parents of the said children, wandering around a truck stop parking lot. And they do believe that they had fecal matter on their person's hair, body for days. Which, how are you going to explain that? How did they get out of the vehicle? Why were they naked? So one, how did they get out? Where is the fecal matter coming from? How long have they been there at the truck stop? Why are these children in this said condition? This is horrible. And this happened in Loxley, Alabama, if I'm pronouncing this correctly. And these are toddlers. This is baffling. Two toddlers, a boy and a girl, walking around a truck stop parking lot. Let me say this because this is ridiculous. These people are obviously on vacation down in Alabama, Tennessee residents with two children. Children wandering around unattended. So as we state, how did the children get out? Why were they in those said conditions with fecal matter on their person's hair, blah, 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 naked? So you mean to tell me you were in a van with your children, naked, without pampers, diapers, food, what? Water, what? You all were sleeping? Hell, were you on drugs, doped up, what? Because what we have to ask ourselves is, the officials are saying that the children were in this state and it looked like it had been on their persons for several days, a few days, let's say, a few. So if we're saying a few days, that means you were in that vehicle with your kids riding around with boo-boo on them while driving around. Because if we are to believe that they were at that truck stop for only a few hours, and naturally surveillance will prove that fact, when they pulled up to that truck stop, you had them in your persons, in your peripheral, in your van, soiled. Why would you have soiled children and not cleaned them? Why were they naked? How did they get out? So if I'm to believe that you let your children running around with boo-boo on them, that means you didn't feed them either. Give them something to drink. What the hell are we talking about? This is atrocious. So now we have children who are probably going to be in the state of Alabama because that is where this crime took place. The parents are from Tennessee. How long have they been here, I'm wondering, as citizens? Are they United States citizens? That's another thing. Are these Romanian people United States citizens? If so, when did they become United States citizens? How long have they been in the U.S.? How long have they lived in the state of Tennessee? How long were they in Alabama with their children? Why in the hell are we even talking about this story of children running amok in a dangerous environment with a bunch of men as truckers running around naked with fecal matter on their hair, body, and allegedly it's been there for a few days. Excuse me. This is atrocious. Prayers for those children. Whatever's going to happen with these people, I don't know. But we'll see if they get bonded out and what goes on from there. That's the said information. Coming out of Loxley, Alabama. And if you need a source for that said information, WKRG News 5 is the source. I'm not going to bring you said information coming out of Memphis, Tennessee. A very horrific situation that is similar to what I'm speaking of that derived out of Alabama pertaining to these two toddlers. More neglect and abuse. And these people should know better. Newsweek.com is the source. Trio accused of spraying their neglected grandmother with air fresheners to hide the smell. Police are investigating a case of aggravated neglect in Memphis, Tennessee, after an 83-year-old woman was found lying naked in her own waste inside her home, left there by her relatives. Lillian Foster was in care of her 3 grandchildren, Jonathan Foster, 40, Sharon Norman, 20, and Marinon Abram, 23, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. The elderly woman was found by a home health care worker who told police she was supposed to treat her twice a week, but her relatives were not allowing her to come into the home, said police. Foster had sores on her heel and wounds to her spine and elbow that were so infected she had visible bones and tendons, according to local news station WREG. This is the first suspect, Jonathan Foster, 40, booked into the Shelby County Jail. You can get a good view of him. The healthcare worker claimed that the apartment smelled heavily of feces and marijuana, and the grandchildren were spraying their grandmother with some sort of air freshener to mask the scent. After being discovered, Foster was transported to Methodist University Hospital where she was treated for her wounds. A medical social worker at the hospital said it appears she had gone without food or water for up to 10 days. The 3 grandchildren were arrested and charged with aggravated neglect of an elderly or vulnerable adult. Under Tennessee state law, neglect of an elderly or vulnerable adult that results in physical harm or bodily injury is a felony. An elderly person is described as someone who is 70 years of age or older. According to the WREG, the Memphis police are looking at another similar case in which a 65-year-old man was found malnourished and dehydrated in the care of his 36-year-old nephew. A social worker with Adult Protective Services discovered the man in that state while conducting a follow-up visit and found him in his bed naked, surrounded by his own waste. The report states there was trash, bugs, and flies all over his home. The man appeared confused and weak. Police also said the nephew was allegedly using his uncle's Social Security money for his own personal use. The uncle was taken to a nearby hospital and treated for his injuries. The nephew is facing charges of aggravated neglect of an elderly or vulnerable adult and financial exploitation. According to the National Council on Aging, NCOA, up to 5 million older Americans are abused every year, and the annual loss of victims of financial abuse is estimated to be at least $36.5 billion. Okay. And then they're also mentioning another incident of severe abuse took place in June, also in Memphis, of a woman. It says in which a woman was arrested after her 85-year-old mother was found lying on a heavily soiled mattress on the floor of the house while covered in bugs, urine, and feces. In an affidavit, a lieutenant with the fire department described it as the worst case of neglect he has ever seen. Sergeant Lewis Brownlee of the Memphis Police Department told Newsweek, elder abuse is a growing concern in Memphis as well as in other parts of the country. Elders are being abused physically, mentally, and financially exploited. The Memphis Police Department Elder Abuse Investigative Unit works with several agencies that collectively investigate elders who are being abused, Brownlee added. All this information was uploaded 7/29/21. And if you need verification for the story, Newsweek is the source for this said information. If you want to verify all said commentary pertaining to the 3 adults in Memphis that are obviously cousins who abused their grandmother and left her in her own fecal matter, Also a case of a nephew abusing his said uncle, and then another woman in Memphis abusing her said mother. Let me say for the record that Jonathan Foster, 40, Sharian Norman, 20, and Marianon Abram, 23, are the three charged in the neglect of this elderly 83-year-old woman. All parties are African American. The victim, 83, is black, and the suspects are black. If you need verification of the race, this is atrocious. A 40-year-old man. So this leads me to wonder if he is the parent of these younger two parties, the female 20, and I'm assuming the male 23, if I am pronouncing the names correctly, because they're all strange looking names. So I'm assuming one is female, one is male. But these are two males, one female. One older adult, 40, two younger adults, 20 and 23, and I believe the female is 20 and the boy guy is 23. This is ridiculous that I'm even having to repeat this. First story, foreigners here in America on vacation, Tennessee residents, children running around a truck stop in Alabama in their fecal matter and naked, malnourished. Now we have three grown-ass people in Memphis abusing an 83-year-old grandmother, house smelling of weed, an air freshener, and the thought that they're going in a room spraying air freshener on their own grandmother. You know you can't mask the smell of fecal matter. You have to burn a lot of incense and cigarette smoke and marijuana to get the smell of fecal matter out of the room. And the fact that they're in another room chiefing shows you the lack of respect they have for oneself and the grandmother. So now we have to ask ourselves, is this a house, is this an apartment, a duplex? Who owns the house, apartment? Whose name is on the lease? Are these people's names on the lease? Were they staying with the grandmother? Is this her home? How did they come to be in this house with her? Are any of these parties the legal guardian on paperwork pertaining to the grandmother? Where are her children at? The grandmother? So where are her children? Because obviously her child is the parent of the 40-year-old. I'm assuming. This is atrocious. The disrespect for this elderly lady. The blatant disrespect of three people conspiring to lay up in this woman's home or with her and neglect her and abuse her in such a manner. And the fact that these other two people, young couple, here in America, have their children running around a truck stop in Alabama. They're sleeping in a van while their children are running around naked, not fed, naked, and boo-boo all over them, in their hair and everything. This is ridiculous. Atrocious. Heinous. Both crimes are heinous, alongside the other cases I brought you inside the article of the nephew and uncle and the woman and her mother. All are foul and rank. If you see something, say something. First couple don't need children. Second group of three grandchildren did not need to be taking care of an elderly woman. They don't need to be taking care of children. They don't need to be babysitting children. They don't need to be procreating. And they don't need to be a caregiver of any persons with a pulse. And I hope that each party mentioned in this article will get justice. The people abused will get justice, and all parties will be, what's the word I'm looking for? They will get a lot of time in prison. Not jail, not a slap on the wrist, not a fine, but get several years in prison for abuse. Because what if one of these children had died? What if this elderly lady had died? What if these other elderly people mentioned in the article had died? Now you're talking about a murder charge. And you willingly abused the person and left them to fend for themselves without food, water, comfort, clean linen, diapers changed, baths, all of that. And the fact that this elderly woman lived up to 10 days without food, they recommend your body starts to break down after day 3 or 4 without water or food. She survived 10 whole days when a caregiver, I guess, made a way in and or authorities were called. And that is another thing. How many times did the caregiver attempt to knock on the door, call to get inside that said residence? I'd like to know that. How many times did the agency call saying, hey, we're trying to reach Miss such and such, she's not answering the phone, blah, blah, blah. Did they ever answer the phone from authorities and or the home health care agency and or the caregivers? How many attempts were made by the agency and the caregivers to make way into that house? Who else knew of the abuse? You got to think about that. Where is the grandmother's children? Where are they? Why were these said people left behind to contend with this elderly lady? Where are her biological children? And why were these stinking ass grandchildren caring for this 83-year-old woman? And did other people know of the abuse in the home? And as I state, who is her provider, caretaker over her said monies? That's another thing. Who had access to her account? The 40-year-old? Was he her overseer, payee? And you do see this a lot with people abusing adults, mentally challenged adults, adults and children, taking their money and spending their money and abusing the people, locking them in rooms, not caring for them, not feeding them. And worst case scenario, murder. Yes. I just brought you information pertaining to a mentally challenged adult out in Oklahoma who was found buried in a tub in someone else's basement. And her brother and his wife are the suspects in her demise. They had access to her account because I guess he was over her monies. And they now have seized all that information out of this said apartment that they were collecting her Social Security checks while she has been dead for 3 years in a tub in his friend's basement. So we also have to question this friend how he didn't know what was going on in his own damn basement. Because allegedly the brother stored his belongings down there and had lived with this said friend, he and his wife. So now we have to ask ourselves, how long did the sister live with the brother under his care? Because allegedly she stayed in a facility. How long was she in that said facility? See, there's too many questions. And what about other family members? Did they not notice something when they couldn't reach the young lady? Hadn't heard from her 3 years. She's now being discovered in a tub, in a basement, wrapped 20, 30 times in plastic. You see the trend? It's out of control. See something, say something. Because I think in these instances, somebody has got wind that something is not right because they cannot reach these victims. That should be sign number one. When you cannot reach the victim. So people couldn't reach the young lady, you should have called police. Same thing with this elderly grandmother in Memphis. Doesn't she have friends, church members, neighbors? You should know something. Did they not smell anything? Depending on if this is a house, apartment, or whatever, stay woke. You see something, say something. Don't be a party to a crime. Because if people are brought up on charges for neglect, abuse, and or murder, you are now a witness to something that could have been avoided. And law enforcement and other agencies could have come in to save the said person. Why in the world would you want that on your conscience? Stop worrying about the snitch rule, because you wouldn't want it done to you, and you wouldn't want this done to your family members and or children. So why in the world would you be a party to it going on with somebody else? God bless all the victims in this story. The girl who passed away in Oklahoma, prayers to her family. Justice will be served against her brother and his wife. Justice served in the 3 grandchildren abusing the grandmother down in Memphis. And the other 2 stories brought forth of a woman abusing her 85-year-old mother and the man abusing his uncle. And also the new case of the children wandering around in the truck stop. The couple is from Romania. They are very young. And they were found sleeping in a van. And they need to be held responsible and accountable for what they did to their said toddlers. Because it's showing evidence that the children had been in their own soilment for a few days. So that's gross negligence and abuse. I want to thank you all for joining me. If you want to donate to the channel, $Big Angie. 129 Cash App. God bless all of you. Have a safe week. Prayers for all children, adults, vulnerable adults, missing children, and missing adults. Prayers for Summer Wells and her brothers. Prayers for Chad Carr, 32, missing out of East Tennessee, and Dashina Kyle, 27, missing out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Prayers to their families. Justice for the missing, the exploited, and the deceased. Amen. Everyday Shenanigans.